By singing this song, Caritamrta, which was written by Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, who was a very dear friend of Srila Guru Krishna. Shriya Raja Madhava Kunjabihari
Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari
Jaya Raja Madhava Kunjabihari
Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari
Jaya Gopi Janvala Giridharadhari
Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari
Jaya Gopi Janvala Giridharadhari
Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari
Yashodanandana Braja
Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana
Yashodanandana Braja
Yashodanandana
Jana
Braja Jana Ranjana
Yamuna Tira
Yamunatira Vanachari
Yamuna Tira
Yamunatira Vanachari
Kunjabihari
Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari
Kunjabihari
Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari
Jaya Gopi Janvala
Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari
Jaya Gopi Janvala
Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari
Jai Vishnu Bhagavad History Acharya Prabhupada ki
Jai
Jai Vishnu Bhagavad History Acharya Bhakti Stanza Sasa Krishna Prabhupada ki
Jai
Jai Nitya Pradesh Shri Gaur Das Maharaj ki
Jai
Jai Nitya Pradesh Shri Satchidananda Thakur Bhaktivinoda ki
Jai
Jai Nitya Shri Sarvabhauma Shri Sarvabhauma Jagat Dasa Maharaj ki
Jai
Shri Guru Parampara ki
Jai
Shri Caitanya Charitamrta ki
Jai
Shri Guru Dasa Maharaj ki
Jai
Shri Caitanya Mahaprabhu ki
Jai
Shri Tulsinath Maharaj ki
Jai
Shri Giridhara ki
Jai
Shri Nathaganda Devi ki
Jai
Shri Nisimdev Gohar ki
Jai
Anantapati Vaishnavrinda ki
Jai
Jai Gaur Pinda
Hari
All glory to Sindhu
Hare Krishna
All glory to Sindhu
Hare Krishna
All glory to Sindhu
Hare Krishna
All glory to the lotus feet of Shri Guru and Shri Gaur
Gauranga
So, as usual, every morning we have a reading from one of our prominent Shastras, prominent scriptural texts. On Monday to Saturday, we read from Caritamrta Srimad Bhagavatam, and on Sunday we read from Sri Caitanya Caritamrta. And then whenever we have a special observance of the life event of one of our predecessor teachers, then we read something from their biography. And then every morning we read a little from the biography of His Divine Grace, Vasi Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. This is the 6th volume biography. And this volume is volume 6. And it's right at the very end of Srila Prabhupada's time with us on this earth. So this is in India in 1977 in October, maybe late October. So we're continuing reading from these events. Srila Prabhupada ki.
Jai.
Finally, Prabhupada concluded, the hospital is not a guarantee, but we take it as up-to-date scientific knowledge. My godbrother Tirthamaraj had to undergo all these treatments, and they were very proud that he died with the best scientific treatment. My Guru Maharaj, however, did not like it when he was given injection. He objected, saying, "Why are you giving? Going to a hospital means giving in to the mercy of the material scientists. Whatever they like, they will do. They cannot guarantee, and we cannot be confident. And going to Vrindavan, whatever may happen, let Krishna do it. Hospital is a chance technique. Going to Vrindavan, I have no objections. But now there is a dilemma. I am neither dying nor living." When Tamal Krishna asked whether the Vrindavan Ayurvedic Kaviraj was any better than the present one in Bombay, Prabhupada replied, "Better or worse, some husbands must be there." Tamal Krishna then offered a new argument. As long as Prabhupada was in Bombay waiting for the opening of the temple, he said, then he would have a reason for living. But if he returned to Vrindavan, it would mean he was going there to die. So on that basis, Prabhupada should remain in Bombay, since it would help him give him motivation to live. Srila Prabhupada smiled and said, "That is sentiment." Now that Prabhupada sounded so convinced there was no alternative, there was no question of the devotees controlling him. Only Krishna could. Some of the alternatives have been frightening, and certainly the idea of voting about Prabhupada had been. Now some of the devotees laughed nervously, relieved to hear Prabhupada's final decision. "Vrindavan," said Srila Prabhupada, "let's go." "Yes, Prabhupada," said Surabi. "But Srila Prabhupada," said Tamal Krishna, "what will happen to all the devotees here? They have been serving you so sincerely. How will they be able to open the temple without you being here? I mean, all the devotees, when they hear you are going to Vrindavan, they will all want to come. They won't want to stay here. Then they will all want to leave their posts and come with you to Vrindavan." "Yes, then let them come," said Srila Prabhupada. "I have no objection." Tamal Krishna mentioned that if 1,000 devotees might come to be with Prabhupada, that would slow down the ISKCON work all over the world. Prabhupada again said he had no objection. Tamal Krishna asked whether it was compulsory for the GBC governing body committee members to come, and Prabhupada affirmed that it was. There were no more questions, and the devotees excused themselves to go and make immediate preparations for Prabhupada's moving to Vrindavan. Only Kuladri remained in the room with Prabhupada. So Kuladri asked Prabhupada, what do you think? Kuladri had been disturbed by the fact that some of the devotees seemed to be opposing Prabhupada's desire and even arguing against it. Srila Prabhupada, he said, I don't really understand. How can they give you advice like that? I feel like an intruder. I shouldn't even be here. But it seems to me that you are waiting for Krishna to make some decision on whether you stay or go. What? Prabhupada asked. It seems you are waiting for Krishna's decision, said Kuladri. If you are going to wait for Krishna's decision, that might as well be in Vrindavan. Prabhupada smiled and closed his eyes. Yes, he said, that is very good advice.
Yeah.
Shri Prabhupada ki
Jai.
So interesting as Shri Prabhupada once, he says that going into hospital is the most up-to-date scientific solution, you can say, or often not solution, but mitigation. And then when Shri Prabhupada first was in the USA in, I think, 1967, and he had some seizure or stroke or mild heart attack, and he was taken into hospital. And he didn't object to going into hospital, but he could perceive that once you're in that environment, the hospital environment, then you're at the mercy of that institution, that very powerful, bureaucratic and very proud institution where everyone's convinced that they have the best solution to your life, really. So when he perceived that he was in the hands of people who didn't really care for him as a whole being, but they were only interested in his body, then he said to Ramananda, "Just get me out of here." And it was in the middle of a huge hospital in New York, the biggest hospital, I think, in the USA. And so Ramananda got some hospital trolley and put Prabhupada on the trolley and started wheeling him out. And all of the nurses said, no, stop, you can't. But he got out anyway. So we shouldn't take, Srila Prabhupada's statements just out of context and say, Srila Prabhupada didn't agree with any Western medicine. He agreed with what was practical in the situation or what was the best option, but not that by taking the best option, then he warned against becoming dependent on that system, which was basically a very impersonal, atheistic system. So that was his warning there. Anyway, whatever he does, there are many different lessons to be learned from all of his statements, and we need to study in context with other things that he said before we can start saying, Prabhupada. We shouldn't just take one statement and then assume that was Prabhupada's mood in all circumstances. So now we're reading from the biography of Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu,
Would you read?
who is the most prominent teacher in our sampradaya, in our tradition of spiritual masters, at least in this millennium. And when I say this millennium, it's the last 1,000 years. Not in this millennium, in the other sense. So he appeared, he was performing his teaching and other activities in India. He appeared in 1486 and he left. He lived for 48 years. So we're reading from his biography.
Prabhu,
Sorry?
sorry. Please see if you would like to read from Gaur Kishore Das
Thank
Babaji.
you. So before we read from that, we're going to read a little bit to observe the Tirabha of Sri Gaur Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj. In 1848, Sri Gaur Kishore Das Babaji left household life after the death of his wife. He moved to Vrindavan and took initiation from Sri Bhagavad Das Babaji, a disciple of Jagannath Das Babaji. For over 30 years, Gaur Kishore Das Babaji stayed in Vrindavan, performing his worship under the trees at Giri Govardhan, Nandigram, Vashana, Radhakund, Suryakund, Raval, and Gokula. Sitting in seclusion, he chanted 200,000 names of Krishna every day, 128 rounds of japa. As he wandered through the 12 forests of Raj, he would loudly chant the holy names in a deep voice full of lamentation. His mood of renunciation was unparalleled. Sometimes he ate mud from the banks of Radhakunda or the Yamuna. Other times he took madakari from the Brajvasis. Madakari is Babaji's daily practice of begging a little food from 1 to 7 houses, just to bee collects a drop of honey from each flower. He saw all residents of Vrindavan as being direct personal associates of Radha and Krishna, and so would pay respects to every person, cow, animal, bird, tree, creeper, insect, and ant in the holy Dharma of Vrindavan. While staying in Varshana, he made a flower garland every day for Radha Krishna, Roy, and Kanu. After 30 years of rendering intimate service in Vrindavan, Babaji Maharaj felt inspired by the divine. He visited all of the leader stands of Lord Gauranga in Gauramandal. He used to sing one bhajan, which means, by receiving Nitai's mercy, one gets Gauranga's mercy, which makes one eligible for Krishna Prema. Without Krishna Prema, one cannot attain the service. Awesome. With Krishna Prema, one can attain the service of Srimati Radharani in the Gopis. He regularly associated with and heard Srimad Bhagavatam from Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur in Swananda Sukata Kunj in Godrumadri. Constantly absorbed in bhajan, Srila Babaji Maharaj had no desire to make disciples. On the request of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, however, he reconsidered. Upon seeing the true humility and deep attachment of Thakur Bhaktivinoda's son, Bimal Prasad, Gaur Kishore Das Babaji initiated him as Sri Varshavalavi Devi Dayita Das, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. To keep mundane people from approaching him for material benedictions, he once resided in the lavatories at the Kuliya Dharmasala in Koladri for 6 months. When public officials came offering to build him a proper bhajan kutia, Babaji Maharaj locked himself inside and said he already had one. He believed that associating with materialistic people was much worse than the smell of the stool in the latrine. The essence of Srila Gaur Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj's instructions were: the divine name of Krishna offers the one and only shelter. One should never try to remember Radha Damodar's transcendental pastimes by artificial methods. Constantly chanting the divine names will purify the heart. By chanting Harinam, the syllables of the Maha Mantra will gradually reveal the spiritual form, qualities, and pastimes of Sri Krishna. Then you will realize your own eternal spiritual form, service, etc. On the 19th of November 1915, Shri Guru Kishore Das Babaji joined the eternal blissful pastimes at Gandhara Giridhari. His beloved disciple, Sri Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, established his samadhi near Lord Caitanya's yoga pit in Sri Dambayapur. In Rajalila, he served Srimati Radharani as Kunja Manjari. Srila Guru Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai. Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda
Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda
Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda
Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda
Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda
Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda
Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda
Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda
Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda
Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda
Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda
Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Krishna
Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare
Hare Rama
Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare
Hare Rama
Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare 112.
Sorry?
112.
112.
Yes.
So I'll read verses 112 and
13. Yes.
Sannyasi Chittana Jeev Kirana Sam Shadaishwarya Purna Krishna Hayasurya Ram. The sannyasi in a renounced order is certainly part and parcel of the complete whole, just as a shining molecular particle of sunshine is part and parcel of the sun himself. Krishna is like the sun, full of six opulences, but the living entity is only a fragment of the complete whole. Text 113. Jiva,
Jiva,
Ishvara Tattva,
Ishvara Tattva,
Prabhu,
Prabhu,
Nahe,
Nahe, Sama,
Jiva Ishvara Tattva, Nahe,
Jiva Ishvara Tattva, Kabunai Sama, Jvala, Agni, Rashi, Yaiche,
Spulingera,
Kana,
Jvaladagni Rashi Yaiche, Spulingera Kan,
Jvaladagni Rashi Yaiche, Spulingera Kana,
Jiva Ishvara Tattva Kabunare Sam,
Jiva Ishvara Tattva Kabunai Sama,
Jvaladagni Rashi Yaiche, Spulingera Kan,
Jvaladagni Rashi Yaiche, Spulingera Kana,
Jiva Ishvara Tattva Kabunare Sam,
Jiva Ishvara Tattva Kabunai Sama,
Jvaladagni Rashi Yaiche, Spulingera Kan,
Jvaladagni Rashi Yaiche, Spulingera Kana, Jiva Ishvara Tattva Kabunai Sama, Jvaladagni Rashi Yaiche, Spulingera Kana, Jiva Ishvara Tattva Kabunai Sama, Jvaladagni Rashi Yaiche, Spulingera Kana,
Jiva,
Jiva,
a living being,
a living being,
Ishvara Tattva,
Ishvara Tattva,
and the Supreme Personality of Godhead,
and the Supreme Personality of Godhead,
Prabhu,
Prabhu,
at any time,
at any time.
Nahe,
Nahe, not. Sama,
equal,
equal.
Jwalat Agni Rashi,
Jwalat Agni Rashi,
large flame,
Yaiche,
us,
as.
Spulingera,
Spulingera,
of a spark,
of a spark.
Kana,
Kana,
fragmental portion.
fragmental portion.
Translation. The living entity and the absolute personality of Godhead are never to be considered equal, just as a fragmental spark can never be considered the original flame. Please repeat. A living entity and the absolute personality of Godhead
A living entity and the absolute personality of Godhead
are never to be considered equal,
are never to be considered equal,
just as a fragmental spark
just as a fragmental spark
can never be considered the original flame.
can never be considered the original flame. Jai.
Mayavadi sannyasis consider themselves Brahman, and they superficially speak of themselves as Narayan. The monistic disciples of the Mayavadi school, known as Smarta Brahmins, are generally householder Brahmins who accept the Mayavadi sannyasis as Narayan incarnate. Therefore, they offer their obeisances to them. Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu immediately protested this unauthorized system, specifically mentioning that the sannyasi is nothing but a fragmental portion of the Supreme, Chitkana Jiva. In other words, he is nothing more than an ordinary living being. He is never Narayan, just as a molecular portion of sunshine is never the sun itself. The living entity is nothing but a fragmental part of the absolute truth. Therefore, at no stage of perfection can a living entity become the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This Mayavada viewpoint is always condemned by the Vaishnava school. Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu himself protested this philosophy. When the Mayavadis accept sannyas and consider themselves Narayan, they become so puffed up that they do not even enter the temple of Narayan to offer respects, for they falsely think themselves Narayan himself. Although Mayavadi sannyasis may offer respect to other sannyasis and address them as Narayan, they do not go to a Narayan temple and offer respects. These Mayavadi sannyasis are always condemned and are described as demons. The Vedas clearly state that living entities are subordinate parts and parcels of the Supreme. Eko Bhuvunam Yo Vidadati Kamam. The Supreme Being, Krishna, maintains all living entities. Shishtango Vishram Sapatam Yenaputali Swam Dhamma Data Sapatam. Vande Ham Shigro Shutabakamam Shigri Vaishnavam Shah Shigupam Sapatam Sakam Veditam Tam Tam Sajivam. Sarvatam Savatutam Vijna Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam. Shirada Krishna Padam Saharimalayata Shivashakam Tam Shah. Vanshadata Durvyasha Vasudeva Chadatam Bhavi Vaishnavam. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya. Bhagavatam Shri Hare Sadguru Bhaktivinoda Hare
Krishna, Hare
Hare
Krishna,
Krishna
Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare.
So I'd just like to ask for the blessings of the assembled Vaishnavas for a little empowerment to speak on this verse. It's actually a very important verse. And a lot of very strong points, but also some subtle points to understand. If you have any if there are any questions which we don't have the opportunity to answer now, because we don't have a long time, then then actually these questions are considered actually in our Bhagavad Gita classes, because it's like really an essential, basic part of the philosophy. So there'll be lots of opportunity to ask questions about this text in every day, actually, in our different classes. So one thing to understand is that nearly all of our philosophical texts are written in Sanskrit. Sanskrit is a language, and it actually means perfectly composed. And you might ask, well, how is it perfectly composed if it's so complex and takes 15 years to learn? And why is it so difficult? Could we not have composed a language that's easier to understand? Because Sanskrit actually does allow many different interpretations of the same sentence, or of even the same word, let alone like a whole book. So, like one very prominent text in like the Sanskrit corpus of literature is the Vedanta Sutra, and there are thousands of different commentaries on that text, and coming from that one text, there's different schools of philosophical thought which go back 2,000 years, and they all have their validity. They can all, within their own paradigm, they can prove that they're not deviating from the Sanskrit meaning. So, for example, here in the first sentence of the purport, Srila Prabhupada says, Mayavadi sannyasis consider themselves Brahman, and they superficially speak of themselves as Narayana. So the word Brahman is used very broadly in Sanskrit literature. So Brahman can be used to mean, and it actually is used even in the Bhagavad Gita, to mean the living entity, to mean the individual jiva. It's also used to mean the totality of all existence, both spiritual and material. So it requires a very deep study of the literature to understand how the word is used in context. So Srila Prabhupada, founder Acharya, and he not only was he a very great Sanskrit scholar, but also he was a very profound and deeply meditative practitioner of Bhakti Yoga. So although he may not have been quite so well expert in dissecting all of the different meanings of the Sanskrit words, but he understood the actual intention of the original authors. So one of the intentions of the original authors of the Vedic literature was to allow the literature to be accepted by a wide range of different philosophers and different administrators and even different professions, so that they could all feel that this is my philosophy, or this is my tradition. And in this way, the whole culture of that Bharatvarsha, that society, would be connected through a common philosophy, a common modus operandi. But naturally, it would also lead to debate and sometimes to conflict between the different schools. And so, in 1965, when Srila Prabhupada first came to the USA See, he was born in India in 1896 and he lived in India until 1965. But on the request of his spiritual master, he came to Europe and America and he eventually traveled throughout the world. So in 1965, when he first came to New York, he had no money actually. He just supported himself by selling a few books which he had and asking for donations from sympathetic people. And he actually was offered a place to stay by a Mayavadi teacher called Dr. Mishra. So here Srila Prabhupada is criticizing very strongly the Mayavadi philosophy, but nevertheless he saw this person as his friend because they shared the same culture and they shared a certain respect in the sense that you could engage in a very forceful debate on the interpretation of Sanskrit. You could completely disagree with each other on a philosophical point, and you could even like very heavily criticize each other, but still remain friends in the sense that you were part of that ancient culture that allowed for this dialogue. So Srila Prabhupada, it's very difficult for us to understand this actually in the West in one sense. You know, that Srila Prabhupada could really attack people very, very like heavily and condemn them and call them like cheaters, call them, call them the people who are destroying civilization, destroying the lives of young people, giving them false propaganda, but at the same time having a genuine affection for them as individuals, as fellow human beings. So that's one very wonderful quality of our spiritual tradition, is that all of our teachers and philosophers managed to display this amazing balance in their personalities, that they were able to speak the truth without any compromise, but simultaneously maintain respect for everyone, because they saw everyone as being Spulingera, Jiva Ishvara Tattva. So they saw everyone as being an eternal fragmental spark of the absolute truth. And in that sense, everyone is Brahman. But Srila Prabhupada shows here that this particular school of philosophers, they become intoxicated, they become proud of their philosophical understanding. So they were very strongly asserting, yes, we are Brahman. We are, our nature is the same as the absolute truth. We are eternal knowledge, we are eternal existence. We are the supreme. But they weren't balancing that with the respect for all living entities, and therefore their philosophical understanding was like interacting with their false ego. It was interacting with their deep-seated anarthas, their deep-seated lust and anger and envy, which was still in their hearts, but so they weren't, because of pride, and they weren't actually recognizing that they hadn't attained that purity. So they had a philosophical understanding of the common oneness of the living entity with the absolute truth. In that sense, all living entities are also Brahman. But they didn't have the humility to acknowledge that they hadn't yet attained that level of purity. So for that reason, actually it's interesting, for that reason, Srila Prabhupada, when he first took his American and European disciples to India, then sometimes they would, when they were walking in Vrindavan, then they would see these Mayavadi sannyasis who would wear a very stark red cloth, not like our saffron, like Jainanda is wearing, but a very bright red cloth. And so our Western disciples, because we've been hearing Srila Prabhupada criticize the Mayavadi sannyasis, then they avoided them. They didn't want to get involved in a debate with them, because they knew that those persons were so expert in Sanskrit and philosophy and logic that they could actually defeat them and they could actually disturb their minds. So Srila Prabhupada said we shouldn't engage in debate with them. So those Western disciples, they were amazed when they saw that spiritual master Srila Prabhupada paid prostrate obeisances to the sannyasis. So he bowed down on the dust of Vrindavan. So Srila Prabhupada said, no, we should offer them respect because they have actually devoted their life to the study of the Vedic literature, and they're very austere, they're practicing celibacy, they're like vegetarians from birth, and they're actually following a wonderful culture. We should offer them respect, but we shouldn't engage in conversation with them. For two reasons. One is, if we're actually still not fully conversant with the Sanskrit Shastra, they'll defeat us because they're expert in arguments and debate. They can even turn your mind away from your convictions. So that's one reason we don't engage in debate with them. Another reason we don't engage in debate is because they will not be able to accept the conclusions of the devotional conclusions of the Vaishnava literature, because they're still actually very attached to their own opinions, and they have this weakness of pride. And unless we ourselves are completely free from pride, unless we are completely pure and free from any false ego, then we'll be dragged into that kind of that kind of dystopian argument, which will not benefit anyone. So Srila Prabhupada was offering them respect as being part of that tradition, but not encouraging intimate dealings. So this and Caitanya Mahaprabhu also showed that wonderful example as well when he went to Varanasi, Benares. So Varanasi was considered the capital of Sanskrit scholarship in the whole world, actually, along with Navadvip. But Varanasi had an older history in one sense. It was more widely known. So many Mayavadi sannyasis have been studying Sanskrit and Vedanta and the Nyaya logic and the Upanishads in Varanasi. And Caitanya Mahaprabhu went there because he knew there was a few very, very soft-hearted Vaishnavas living in that place, and that they were actually, intimidated, or they were, feeling bereft of good association. So he went there to give them association. And they were expressing that, oh, please help us, we're constantly hearing people criticize you. So anyway, Lord Caitanya, he went to an assembly of these Mayavadi sannyasis, and he just he displayed extreme humility by not joining their circle, not joining their kind exalted assembly, but just sitting down in the doorway next to all of the shoes. And like, in a big Indian house, like sitting down next to the shoes and sitting in the dirt, basically. And so the leader of that assembly said, why are you sitting here? You are Narayan. Because at that time, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was a sannyasi. So the Prakashananda Saraswati, the head of that assembly, he was saying, yeah, you are one of us, you are also God. Why are you sitting there in that dirty place? But because Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was completely pure of any ego or pride, then the assembled sannyasis, they actually became sufficiently purified by his presence to actually hear the philosophy of Krishna Bhakti. And their hearts changed by that association. In our dealings, we can learn from these examples. We can learn from Srila Prabhupada's example. And all of our acharyas, they're all pure in heart. And some of them are very expert in Sanskrit and others are not. But they actually all know the conclusion of the Sanskrit literature, because all of the Sanskrit literature is inspired by Krishna's desire to elevate us all to a platform of purity and love and truth and real compassion for all living beings. So whenever it may appear that Srila Prabhupada is being very argumentative or very unwilling to move from his philosophical position, it's because he's protecting us from being contaminated by the desire to be right or the desire to be seen to be learned. One devotee who was here a few weeks ago, Caitanya, who was an temple president at Sword Street for about 10 years, he said that of all of the anarthas, of all of the unwanted desires in our hearts, the most powerful and dangerous of them all is the desire to be right. So I'll just stop there and see if there's any questions or comments from anyone.
One question. Yes, bro. Thank you for the class, bro. In the purport, the first sentence, it says Brahman. Could you explain, perhaps in my
Okay, so one meaning is the absolute truth. Another meaning is the totality of everything, which is also the absolute truth. And another meaning is the total uncontaminated spiritual energy. So although we are part of the Brahman, in the sense that we are both our bodies are part of the Brahman, our minds, our emotions, and also our identity are part of the Brahman. But because we have this concept of false ego, then we act as if we were different from the totality of everything. We act as if we were an independent mover. So therefore we talk about, in the process of Bhakti Yoga and even in the process of Sankhya Yoga and Jnana Yoga and Hatha Yoga, and we talk about achieving the platform of Brahman. Actually, we're already on that platform because every aspect of our existence is coming from the Brahman. So we actually are already that. But because of our mentality, because of our pride or our sense of independence, then we're not able to appreciate our identity. So anyway, it's a very big subject, and it's described. It's explained throughout the Bhagavad Gita, especially in chapter 13, nature, the enjoyer, and consciousness. And a good study of that chapter will help you understand how the word Brahman is used in different contexts, and how also in the Bhagavad Gita the word Parabrahman is used. So we are Brahman, but we're not Parabrahman. So Para means the ultimate or the supreme Brahman. So here, we can't become the Parabrahman. We can't become the supreme, all-knowing, all-powerful, all-compassionate mover, prime mover. But we can become this. We can become the pure spark. We are the pure spark, but because we're trying to be the Parabrahman, rather than accept ourselves as being the Anu or the atomic Brahman, then because of that interference, you could say, or because of that distortion or that improper identification, then we're experiencing unhappiness, we're experiencing frustration, anger, we're experiencing pride, and therefore we're not able to feel grateful for being a pure spiritual being, because we're trying to become a supreme spiritual being. So, this is really all of our philosophy and all of our discourses are all about this point. Okay.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Okay, stop there. Shri Chaitanya Charitamrta ki
Jai.
Shri Prabhupada ki
Jai.
Shri Gaurkishore Dasapati Maharaj ki
Jai.
Jai Gaur
Hari Hari Bol. His Grace Javat Vasi Prabhu ki.
Yes.